Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone, depending on where you're joining us from. Welcome to day 2 of 6G World's 6G Symposium. My name is Peter Jarich. I'm the head of GSMA Intelligence. For those of you who don't know, that's the research and consulting arm at the GSMA. So it's our job to look into the insights, look into the data, provide the research that helps to drive the success of the industry. And it's why I'm so honored to be kicking off day 2 of the 6G Symposium with a great set of speakers on the topic of a 6G digital society for Europe. If you tuned in to the symposium yesterday, you got an incredible primer on 6G, what it is, what 6G isn't, services, KPIs, requirements for 6G going forward, what 6G enabled business ecosystems might look like, what it might mean for verticals, right? If you know, we're obviously years away from 6G becoming a reality with rollouts, but it's fair to say that yesterday gave us a really good view into what it might look like. If you didn't manage to join yesterday, no worry, stay tuned for more information on replays. Check them out. It was great content. Today then, for day 2, we'll start looking at what it might mean for policy and national digitalization agendas. You know, we all know that with every new technology generation, there's an opportunity for governments, regional bodies, to drive change, secure new opportunities, potentially in competition with other regions. We saw that with 5G. We continue to see that with 5G. 6G will be no different. That's why it's important that we're beginning to have these conversations today. We're beginning to have these conversations now. And that's why it's so great that the team at 6G World pulled together this wonderful set of speakers for this morning's keynote. So thank you all for joining us. Thanks again to everyone, and thanks to the speakers. So today, as I mentioned, we'll be hearing from a great set of speakers. We'll have 4 different presentations, and then I'll be leading off on a panel. So we'll hear presentations from Pearse, Director of Future Networks DG Connect at the European Commission, then on to Harald Gruber, Head of Digital Infrastructure at the European Investment Bank. Then we'll move on to Colin Willcock, who's Chairman of the 5GIA. Finally, we'll hear from Chalkiotis, VP 5G Solutions, Access and Home Networks with Deutsche Telekom. Then I will lead Kostas as well as Colin in a bit of a conversation. So thank you all once again for joining us. I know you didn't tune in to hear from me, so let's hand off to our first speaker, and that would be Pearse.
Okay, thank you, and good morning, everybody. It's great to be with you, and I will get stuck into the subjects, as Peter said. Because I'm representing the European Commission, and the von der Leyen Commission has put digital technologies at the forefront of our political priorities. And in that context, connectivity has a crucial role to play. Now, this was true long before COVID-19, but at least the crisis has illustrated clearly to everybody in a very practical way, to politicians, to business people, and of course to the population at large, how network and service infrastructures are critical to sustaining our economy and society. And that can only gain in importance with the rollout of 5G, because that's been designed to support digital businesses and a great number of vertical or sectoral use cases, as well as digital applications that affect all aspects of users' lives. And because more and more of our critical business processes depend or will depend on 5G and on data processing technologies, that means that secure and trustworthy connectivity has to be ensured. And that comes with 5G and will be a constant focus of the European Commission. For example, the cybersecurity toolbox on 5G that we worked out with the member states was our response to that global issue at that time. And from that global perspective, the geopolitical perspective, network technologies are becoming really important tools to ensure our economic sovereignty and our industrial leadership. So that's the larger political context. And looking at it from today, Europe does lead in terms of industrial capacity and in terms of our capability to innovate in this domain and elsewhere. And our ambition is to ensure that we consolidate that position and to amplify it, which is something that we have to do closely with you, the communities that are gathered today in the symposium. We have to help European business to take advantage of the new technologies, from all of the new opportunities, but also to develop and to adapt from the more traditional industrial production and the way of doing things. So from that point of view, as well as focusing on 5G, we have to start developing a comprehensive 6G policy. So what does that consist of? Well, first of all, it actually starts with the successful 5G development and deployment. So let me assure you, first of all, that as we talk about 6G, our focus, our day job is 5G rollout. And some of the other speakers on this panel are equally involved. And there's little chance of Europe becoming a 6G leader if we're not a lead market for 5G. So there's continuity here, and it's a key requirement that we consolidate and expand the scientific and the industrial know-how in order to develop the next generation. So we're just about holding our own on 5G deployment. 24 member states have launched 5G services. We have more than 50 active networks, but still compared to the US and Asia, Europe has to scale and move quickly towards the next stage, which, as you know, is the standalone variant of 5G. And then we have to support the developments, and that's where we do actually play a critical role. That is to foster deployment. We have already planned approximately 1 billion euros simply along cross-border automotive and railway corridors, but they become test beds and seeding for the development of further network capacity and innovation, particularly in areas that are not likely to be served in the first rollout in terms of investment priorities. Those corridors will be complemented by national segments, and all of that will also be funded, supported by the Recovery and Resilience Facility, which member states are able to deploy as part of the European efforts to grow us out of the crisis created by COVID. It will reform and invest in different sectors, but it will focus on the green and digital transition. So at least 20% of the 750 billion euros in the recovery fund will support the digital transition, including 5G deployment. So those investments will help to actually put 5G in the ground, in the air, and in people's devices, so that we can then develop on our other digital priorities using this essential technology. The Commission issued an ambitious roadmap for this decade, the Digital Compass communication last month, in which we set very precise targets towards 2030, focusing on things like digital skills for the population and for professionals, secure and high capacity digital infrastructures, the digital transformation of businesses, etc. And even specifically for 2030, we have a 5G target to ensure that by then it is completely covering all the geographical and population areas of Europe. So that's our comprehensive 5G policy. That's how we get to 6G. But what is that? Now, Peter already said that we had a great technical discussion yesterday, and I'm not going to tell you what you don't know about the likelihood of what 6G will look like. But moving from gigabit to terabit capacities, sub-millisecond response times, etc., those are key features and more, which will help for real-time automation, extended reality sensing, actually making the digital twin data processing theory a reality for all applications, for all sectors of the economy. Now, what I can focus on and bring to this discussion is really to focus on the policy and on the research and innovation initiatives that we have. On 6G, there are discussions all around the world. We expect the products and services only to come at the end of the decade, but we have to start the work now. The initiatives that we see in some of Europe's competitors, they are bold, they are ambitious, and they are also supported by a sizable amount of public support, and Europe must do the same. Here we started our reflection almost 3 years ago on what comes next, while we were still working closely with industry on 5G. And we needed to join that up with our wider digital ambitions with regard to digitization of the economy. In January of this year, we launched the first set of 6G projects worth over 60 million under the 5G PPP, with the Hexa X flagship developing the first system concept for 6G, and that is complemented by 8 projects investigating specific technologies for 6G. So this work, these concepts, of course, are at an exploratory phase. There are a lot of research ideas, some of them very exciting, but it's still too early to have a complete system concept that is globally recognized. And that is something which we need to work on as well. So in everything that you hear me say about European sovereignty, we want to be in a joined up world and contributing directly and fully involved in global efforts. So we need, for example, the equivalent to what we had from the ITU recommendation that originally defined a global 5G vision. We need to have that, and Europe needs to be in the lead in contributing to its formulation for 6G, so that we can be sure that everyone can operate to scale, but also that Europe can deploy its capacity and be competitive globally. We do expect that these technologies will contribute to other policies, and this is why, as such, these connectivity and communications technologies have risen up the political agenda because of their role in transforming the economy, transforming industrial sectors, business processes, and of course, people's lives. And that innovation is something that is critical. And in doing that, we must remember that even as you refine the vision and tell us what 6G will be as a technology, we can't allow it just be a new radio interface. That's a lack of vision and something that you need to push us on, and we need to help you to develop, to identify those capacities and capabilities that perhaps nobody has yet thought of, those applications and those uses wider in society that perhaps have not yet been thought of and we could usefully exploit. Because 6G, just like 5G, but has to help us to realize our societal objectives. And top on the list there is the Green Deal on our objectives with regard to a zero carbon economy. Because the network of tomorrow really should, not only should it be radically less energy consuming itself, but the technology, the networks, and the services that they support really have to help to green the use cases, green the vertical sectors that are using the applications, that are using the services, that are availing of 5G and 6G communications technologies. And what's more, in looking at our objectives, we have to also take account of some of the geopolitical issues. This is why we talk so much now about technology sovereignty, taking a broader value chain approach, taking opportunities in components, in devices, not really smartphones, but all of the other devices for massive IoT, connected objects, etc., including cars and robots. But again, so much more that perhaps we have not yet been talking about. We have to master the strategic value chains of microelectronics, components, and the other elements in the value chain, notably for terahertz devices or advanced materials for antenna systems. And of course, Europe has to come back onto the processor stage if we are to be serious across the value chain. So that is a serious set of issues that Europe has to address. There's also the service side with edge and cloud computing integrated into these connectivity platforms and providing advanced services as we move towards swarm computing. And those trends will be initiated with 5G. It will lead to greater disaggregation and cloudification of the networks. And we have to be sure that we understand and anticipate those developments, and that European businesses, European providers, and European OEMs are all at the forefront of those developments and able to anticipate what will, in some cases, be quite dramatic changes. So these are all some of the issues that will be addressed today by the European Commission in the revised industrial strategy that's going to be issued actually later this morning. So watch this space. So we have to be a standard setter. And again, I go back to assuring you that we want to be involved and rely on global standards. We want Europe to be strong and sovereign in that global ecosystem, joined up, connected and open. But we do want to be able to define those standards according to European values, which many people are happy to take when they see their real purpose, particularly with regard to data protection. with regard to respect of the human in terms of artificial intelligence development and so on. We need to shape technology standards with those in mind, including in the field of radio communications. And that is something which Europe can actually win in terms of gaining support from elsewhere for our approach to technology development, which will also give us very meaningful industrial advantages. And that global standardization, it has to be achieved by having effective cooperation at industry level and at government level. So we engage in regular dialogues with leading competitor regions. And of course, we will be working with industry here on focused joint initiatives in research, in standardization, and even in regulation with other partners. And we're clear that in setting the global standard, that we do not ourselves cause or let others fragment the global ecosystem. That is essential, particularly as all of these systems integrate into a much wider platform. So we start with you. We have a strategic RMI roadmap which needs to be finalized, needs to be refined. We need critical mass of European actors, many of whom are here today, to actually address this very, very important set of challenges. We are establishing, as you know, a joint undertaking which is co-led by industry and the Commission, but with closer involvement of member states because of the strategic challenges that are ahead of us. We have to arrange a series of wider problems, as I've just briefly outlined, in terms of policy priorities across all areas of the economy and society, including in particular the Green Deal challenges. So with the Smart Networks and Services Partnership, which is focusing on beyond 5G, this 6G partnership, as we will call it in the future, with industry and member states, will in the first instance get public funding of 900 million euros, which is committed to upfront by us, the Commission, in the hope that it will release a multiple of that in terms of investment by industry and by member states in order to actually give scale to our 6G vision. We're currently addressing that with the member states, but we are here today addressing these issues with you, listening to the research and the industrial communities to set the lead, to take the lead in telling us what you need, what 6G is, and what we, the policymakers, need to do to support you in your work. So I'd like to really appeal to all of you to continue your committed involvement in this challenging work, and we will support you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It wouldn't be a virtual session in 2021 without someone messing up on mute. So I'm glad to take one for the team. But digital twins, the green economy, I mean, talking about geopolitics and a sneak peek into what we may be seeing from the Commission later on today. Thank you very much. That was, I think, a great way to kick things off today. So thank you. With that, I think we'll prep for our second presentation, and that'll be from Harald Gruber. Harald is the head of, he's the head of digital infrastructure at the European Investment Bank. Harald, it's over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to this audience in this very specialized panel here. Next slide, please. Just to give you the background of who is talking to you. I mean, it is the European Investment Bank, or the EIB group as such. Probably many of you have already heard about it, but just a few pointers. I mean, it is the largest multilateral development bank in the world. It is owned by the member states of the European Union, and it has a substantial financial power. It's about close to 70 billion last year, and this is fairly constant also for the next year. It will not decline. And forgive me, it has disappeared. It means it's composed of two major items. One is the banking side, which is 66 billion, and the 13 billion is related to the investment fund. Now, what is now in for the sector of the thing? I mean, the bank is now steering towards a very strong strategic change. It needs to be sort of compliant with the climate priorities. As a result of that, the bank has decided to make by this year all its financing Paris aligned. So it needs to be all the projects that the bank is about to finance need to be Paris aligned. This implies, for instance, for the telecommunications infrastructure, for the broadband infrastructure systems, it's only certain technologies. Fiber and 5G are clearly aligned with that, so this is eligible. But what's more, 50% of the lending are supposed to contribute to climate action. And this is a particularly strong challenge also for this sector. We are trying to identify projects which contribute to basically also to climate action, so which show that their impact is basically helping to reduce the CO2 impact, the carbon impact of the technologies. And we do find projects which are already working in these fields. We have found such components for fiber infrastructure, and we are actively looking to find such components also for mobile infrastructure with 5G and possibly then also for 6G, but let's come to later on that. I mean, how is it now the digital infrastructure sector doing in there? It's under the heading, most of it is under heading of innovation, which last year was around 3 billion. A large part of it is also for 5G infrastructure. So it's about 3 billion per year that the bank is basically financing for digital infrastructure, which makes it actually the largest digital financier also around the world. Now, next slide, please. Let me just now come to the theme of this conference. I mean, what is 5G? I mean, you have seen that it is under definition, closer foundation. What is actually 5G technology-wise? What is supposed to do? But this does not prevent us from looking at it as a bankers. We are a long-time financier. We are public policy bank. We are looking what is of interest to society over the next years, and what is especially interest to European side is what is the European interest in all of this. I mean, I have followed the sector since the second generation mobiles, and I've fairly seen that there are some very regular trends in this sector. I mean, generations come in and sort of in fairly regular cycles, almost like with what you do in the microelectronic sectors, where you have chips coming in regular cycles or processors coming in regular cycles. You have a similar thing here. So you have those waves of product cycles, and one can learn quite a lot of it from looking at what has happened in the past, what have been the mistakes in the past, but there are also some new things, and so you should not just replicate what you did in the past, because sometimes you then you get your fingers burned because things turn out in a different way. I mean, one of the reasons is also why has Europe been the clear leader in 2Gs, but it has not been able to replicate this success in a similar way with the subsequent generations of technologies. So I think we have to very, very carefully look at it. But what is the good thing is that we are now again towards a new generation of technology. So I mean, the cards can be again distributed again, new cards, and there is opportunity perhaps to have a promising play a promising part in this new perspective. Next slide, please. Now, as a banker, I mean, what we look at it is basically what goes a little bit beyond the technologies per se. What are the markets per se? I mean, what does it achieve? Clearly, having in part also a look at the new business targets, basically talking about climate, we believe that digital infrastructure has a significant part to play in this context. And I mean, we see by the day that also with the pandemic, we have seen that you can radically transform within very short time quite a lot of business practices and business opportunities. And therefore, we believe that digitalization is a key ingredient for basically doing implementing the Green Deal propositions. Next slide, please. To this community, probably I don't need to say very much what can be done with 6G. I mean, I'm just looking here at the slide where we were thinking about what could be done with 5G, and we are still working around it. What can really do, because there's still a number of opportunities in 5G that can be still explored and further exploited. So, I mean, but there are a few technical parameters which open up new fields. I mean, latency, transmission speed, and performance. I mean, all those kind of things. We know that also from the past and from the microelectronics sector, that basically as technologies improves, new services will arise. And very often this is clearly a technology-led sector. As the technology moves ahead, the demand and for services will follow as a result. But nevertheless, we need to be carefully thinking about what are the opportunities. I mean, we should not try to make mistakes, and certainly it would be a pity if we would oversee good opportunities, especially if they are of public interest. Next slide, please. Now, I mean, these are the themes for 6G. Clearly, there are some of the technical parameters that we have to look at, but there clearly are also parameters of the scope. What are the market opportunities? Which kind of market segments could be englobed into the remit of mobile technologies? We have also to struggle sometimes with considerations of path dependency, which could be in part linked to technology, but simply in part also because it was done this way in the past, so it should never change. But we have seen that with pandemic, we can radically change sometimes, and basically, I suppose path dependency may not be any more active. So it could well be that we, with the new generation, we could completely look in a new way to the sector and the opportunities. And clearly, all these uncertainties for a banker is a little bit worrying. I mean, bankers, when you come along, they would like to have they would like to assess the risk and figure out what should be the risk premium that they have to charge on loans or things like that. So for the financial community, this is quite a challenging sector. Next slide, please. So, I mean, this is a little bit, if you would like to replicate what is being done for 5G, for 6G, the picture should look like a little bit like this for the EIB as public policy bank. I mean, what have we done with 5G? I mean, with 5G, we have first of all looked, I mean, what I've made a sort of market exploratory. I have a team of telecom experts, so they explore what are the opportunities, what are the technologies, what is the European positioning. So you're very much in the kind of research development of the innovation, so especially on the equipment side. And what we have done here, of course, we have supported European suppliers in this field. I mean, clearly we have done large loans to Ericsson and Nokia, and also to small to SMEs and smaller companies with financial products, which I will talk about later, which are appropriate for the type of the counterpart who is taking on the financing, and also for the technological state that the project is itself. And then, as soon as things arise, we start to help to support the deployment of infrastructure, which is really the big financing. I mean, clearly, most of it is at least initially market-led, but we want to make sure that in this introduction of new technologies, there are not too many segments that are kept out. So we are looking at especially at segments where market failures are pervasive. So it could, I mean, apart from the early rollout, but we would also like to make sure that also, for instance, remote areas are included, or areas which are along strategic corridors. So that's the kind of things that we look at when we look at financing infrastructure. And clearly, then we look also at the verticals, I mean, the adoption in other sectors of the technologies. Next slide, please. I mean, these are more or less the financial products that the bank has in its toolbox. I mean, on the left side, you have the sort of the early stage type of operations that are managed by the European investment funds. But investment funds, so it's basically it's startup funds, it's venture capital, so it's early stage financing. And then, I mean, as the companies grow or the cycle comes along, you get into phases of the industry where large amount of fundings are required within relatively short time and with relatively risky projects. And that's basically what is the typical and one of the most challenging, where Europe has made quite a lot of catch up, but it still needs to do, especially with the US, is where you have talented companies, new companies, but which lack the growth capital. So they go to a financing institution, say, please give me money, I have a nice business plan, but at the moment I have losses. And they say, okay, come back when you have a better balance sheet. And therefore you need several millions of funding on very weak balance sheets. So that's basically the art of what we could refer to as venture debt, or the growth capital finance for companies in a growth stage. And this has become very effective over the last years, especially in nurturing new companies in fast growth areas. And then, of course, when it comes then to large scale rollout of infrastructure, which is in the public interest, that these are relatively early rolled out, there you need fairly large financing, and that's basically the bread and butter business of the bank. In all this, over the last years, we have developed extremely good coordination with also support from financing from the European Commission. We have a very close relationship with DG Connect in defining the strategies for those activities. And I mean, as a result of that, we have a very good product portfolio in our digital infrastructure business. Next slide, please. So let me just conclude then here at this stage. I mean, it's 6G, of course. I mean, you have seen 5 cycles. Why should not come a 6th cycle? And so basically, it will come. Question is, year earlier, year later. I mean, that's a little bit also driven by what the regulations do, how spectrum becomes available. But as usual, it can also come more quickly than expected. So we have to be ready on that. And I think, since Europe, we would like to defend European interest in this sector, I think we have to have a very close eye on this. And I mean, it's good to hear also from Pearse that the Commission is setting up flagships, that there are programs in place which we are providing substantial support to basically develop such technologies. I mean, the investment requirements can be quite substantial within relatively short time, and so with the recovery fund, perhaps it's still too early for 6G, but I think it should lead the way for basically creating or nurturing an environment which is then conducive to upscaling it to 6G. Because, and that's very important, we are playing here in a global context where basically global rivals in technologies and are there. They are stronger than before, and they may not necessarily have the same approach, also sort of ethical approach to certain technologies that we have. Just mentioned also that. And so therefore it is of utmost importance that Europe has a strong positioning this, and we will make sure as a bank that the financing should not be the biggest problem in basically in promoting 6G technologies for Europe. So at this stage, I would thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Harald, and thank you for the reminder that whether it's 5G or 6G, we cannot build these new generations of technology without funding. And that the way we apply that funding and the way we apply that financing has a lot to do with where we get. So thank you very much. That was well appreciated. So with that, let's plan to move to our next presenter. Next up, we have Colin Willcock, who is the chairman of the 5GIA. Colin, it's over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. I'd like to talk a little bit about smart networks and services. Maybe we can go to the next slide. So I'm chairman of the board of the 5G Infrastructure Association, and the 5G Infrastructure Association tries to be the voice of European industry on all things 5G, and in the future, all things 6G. But when we talk about industry, we don't just mean the big players, the Nokia, the Ericssons, the Deutsche Telekoms. We also have the SMEs on board, but equally the academics and the research institutes. So we have the whole ecosystem together, trying to drive forward the agenda on 5G and on 6G. If we go to the next slide, one of the key things we've been doing is representing the private side in the existing 5G PPP program or partnership. So together with the European Commission, we have been running this program, which has had many, many projects defining a lot of what we currently think of as 5G. So in the first phase, a lot of those key concepts were developed going back to 2014, 2015. We then had a second phase where we very much concentrated on the vertical industries, the non-telecoms industries, trying to bring this technology there, trying to work together. And in the current phase, phase 3, we have tried to then create innovation platforms where hopefully we can create the next Facebook, the next Google in Europe. And part of that phase 3 has also been the first set of 6G projects, which Pearse mentioned, things like HexaX and the other supporting projects, trying to create the roadmap for 6G in Europe. So in our view, this has been a very successful partnership, this 5G PPP. And I think if you look at the contributions to standardization, when you look at the scientific papers, if you look at the pre-standardization consensus that we have achieved in those projects, I think it has brought something for not just Europe, but for the world. Now, let's look at the future. So if we could go to the next slide, please. As was said, 2020 or 2021 isn't the end of the story. Indeed, 5G is not the end of the story. And as has been mentioned by numerous people who presented today and probably yesterday, these whole digital communication systems are becoming ever more important, ever more a critical part of our social and industrial landscape, a key differentiator to make us competitive and a key enabler to allow us to tackle the future societal problems, the aging population, the increasing urbanization, things like COVID. And equally, we see that in the landscape that things are becoming ever more political in terms of geopolitics and tension between various regions. And what we need is we need within Europe a strong presence in 6G research. So as was said, 6G isn't about deployment now, it's about deployment in 2030. The story now in terms of technology in the marketplace is 5G, but we know that 6G is coming. And if you work back from 2030 being the date of deployment, now is the right time to start the fundamental research, the search on the building blocks of 6G. And that's what we wish to do with smart networks and services. And that's why this partnership is so important. And again, the 5GIA will be the private side of this smart networks and services. We work together with the European Commission and DG Connect to make this a success, to hopefully drive the key concepts of 6G from Europe. So if we go on to the next slide. There is a key difference, and I'd like to emphasize this, that if you look at our existing partnership, if you look at 5G PPP, there was very much a telecoms focus there. But going forward, when we think of 6G, even though we might not be aware of exactly what it will be, we do have the aspiration or the idea that it will be a much broader technology. We will bring in aspects of IoT, of AI, of cloud. And therefore, in the preparation of this proposal, we've had a much wider group of stakeholders. So it hasn't just been my own association, it's been things like Networld Europe, it's been AOTI, it's been NESI, it's been CISPA Cloud. So we've had a lot of organizations involved in the preparation of this proposal, nearly 1,000 organizations, and those include all the major categories, the industries, the SME and research community. If I can go to the next slide, please. So what do we have as the key objectives? Well, clearly the key objective is to develop that 6G technology, build the foundations of 6G, but equally there is a component trying to make the full potential of 5G. So 5G is still an important aspect in smart networks and services. We need to maximize that digitization of European society using 5G technology now and 6G technology later. And as has been mentioned by Pearse, this technological sovereignty is a key thing looking forward, and trying to make sure we encode those values in the technology so that it supports respect for user data and privacy. We can go to the next slide, please. So we hope that we'll be able to start this smart networks and services in the September-October timeframe. And I don't want to go into too much detail because I only have 3 or 4 minutes left, but just to say some of the ideas or some of the key technologies involved, maybe I can show this slide. So what you see is on the left-hand side, you see the key technologies running into 6G. So things like artificial intelligence, things like terahertz, things like sensing. We feel that's going to be part of the solution. We don't have by any means all the answers or all the use cases, but we feel it's important to include these technologies. And then on the right side, we have what are we trying to achieve? What are the societal impacts? And in the middle, we then have the melting pot where we try and put this all together. And as you'll see, the two overriding concerns, the things linking that all together are this energy efficiency and this security. Okay, if I could go on to the next slide. I wanted at least to have one slide of some content, something to give a vision. I can't say precisely what 6G is, but maybe I could give a flavor or something, a personal opinion of why this might be important. And for me, the key thing or my key hope for 6G is it ties this virtual and this physical world together. It's the glue that sticks those two together. Why should that be of interest? Well, it's of interest because we've talked of digital twinning, the ability to model the real world in the digital world. And at the moment, there's a very loose coupling between the two. We do fairly accurate models, but they're not tied together, not in the millisecond level or not in the accuracy of millimeters. And that's where 6G can improve the situation. It can enable that real-time update, that real-time communication between the physical and the digital world. And that means our models can be far more accurate. What does that bring us? It gives us the ability to know or try and extrapolate what will happen in the real world. So what we can do is through the simulation in the digital world, we can say, look, we know that this machine is very liable to actually go wrong in the next week. We can say this part is liable to fail and we can replace it before that happens. And that's quite an exciting concept. But even more exciting is we can also apply it to ourselves, to humans. If we have a model, a digital model of our bodies, of the way we react, we can then tailor precise medicines to any illness or anything, and we can know precisely what the reactions will be. And that could really change our world. Okay, my time was up. I hope that's been inspiring. One last slide, maybe, just to give my details. Thank you for your time, and let's have a great conference.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Colin. Thank you for the reminder that as much as we heard earlier how important it is for the industry to come together to help shape what 6G will be, that we actually have the industry coming together that we have a large participation of a large number of companies that are doing that to shape what 6G will be, with maybe some ideas of what it could be. So thank you very much. With that, let's go over to our final presenter for this morning, Kostas Chalkiotis with Deutsche Telekom. Kostas, it's over to you.
Thank you, Peter. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thank you for having me here. To be honest, it's nice to hear from all the participants that it's quite early to shape the 6G, but on the other side, let's see where do we stand today, because every new generation of mobile communications, I would say, is connected to a new air interface. And if I can have the next slide, please, we would say that starting from 2G, starting with a GSM, we move to 3G, 4G, and every 10 years we have a life cycle of new technology based on a new air interface. 5G was somehow the same, even though initially it started in a different way from the next generation mobile networks white paper, that it would be a unified communication solution, not only a mobile one. But it ended up that we will have, let's say, a new radio air interface that will be, let's say, much faster, with higher capacity, much higher capacity and lower latency. 5G is lifting off right now, and we have a lot of launches around the world, and including Europe. And as the representative of the European Commission stated, the next step is to go to 5G standalone, but we're still mobile. We're still mobile, and see the discussions. The discussions are running that we have, let's say, higher speeds, lower latencies, and so on. Let's take a step back and see what do we need and what the customers are asking from us. In parallel, since the summer of 2020, globally, there is a big discussion around 6G, mainly driven by this geopolitical situation and the fight between China and US, and Europe is somewhere in the middle. So we have seen that Asian operators and vendors, and also US operators and vendors are starting the discussion to kick off the 6G, implying the risk of having fragmentation. So the Next Generation Mobile Networks Alliance, which is mainly driven by European operators, try to play the glue. And recently we published a 6G vision and how to move on paper, including and incorporating the US and the Chinese market. And I will come to this. But how we position the communication ecosystem towards 6G. And if I can have the next slide. First of all, our vision is that 6G should be the heart and the backbone for the digital society. It is too early, yes. We are focusing that this will come roughly in 2030 or somewhere around there. The vision is that we will have a long way to go to evolve the 5G solution and technology, but maybe 6G is a first-class opportunity for us to reimagine our networks, to reimagine the services, how we are providing things, how we are operating the networks. And of course, this is the right time to proactively shape our future, starting now and getting Europe back in the central stage, not, let's say, being the follower. If I can have this next slide, please. Speaking about bringing back the user at the center, we're speaking about a communication ecosystem that will be a global system, not a fragmented one. Remember what was happening in the past when we had, let's say, when you were moving from continent to continent, you need different terminals and so on. And in parallel, we need to connect with digital services, everyone, everywhere, and anytime, regardless where they are belonging, where they are going. Look what is happening today. Now we are speaking about gigabit speeds and low latency and maybe higher speeds and all these fancy things that are around us. If you go around and drive even in a developed country, I would not say in a country that doesn't have so massively deployed infrastructure, you will see that when you are entering a rural area, you will not get any gigabit speed or low latency, because it's important to have, let's say, coverage there, and also to provide the equipment and roll out the new technologies there, which are not feasible due to other reasons. I will come to this. The second thing that we are seeing as our 6G vision is that it has to be secured. It should be a trustful communication ecosystem for both business and digital business, and also for humans. And last but not least, 6G should be carbon neutral in the DNA, and not only on the energy consumption, but in the entire chain, that the physical resources that are used for this communication ecosystem should be fully recyclable. Let's see what is happening today. We're speaking about higher bandwidths and higher throughputs, which requires, this is physics, the Shannon law, higher energy consumption. And we're trying to bring this energy down by implementing artificial intelligence, doing things that will give us more green energy and so on. Maybe we need to reshape all these things and have a real carbon neutral network. And if I can have the next slide, please. First of all, we need to see which problems we are about to solve, which problems that today we are facing, and we need to not to have them in the 6G world. Look what is happening today. We have mobile networks, we have fixed networks, we have Wi-Fi's, we have IoTs, we have a wide variety of limited and isolated networks, which is not what the end users are asking for. The end users are asking for one network that serves the demands and the different services in a flexible and in a sustainable way. So the services are very much network centric, and of course they are isolated from all over the top services that we have. The big problem that we see is that for years and years, due to other reasons, we are forced to retain and keep migrating and integrating legacy technologies that are not cost efficient, and they are increasing the production cost, and they are complexing the operational model. And of course, today, if you see what is happening, even in 5G, the networks and the communication ecosystems are not human-centric. We're speaking about connecting machines, talking between refrigerators and automotives, autonomous driving. Where is the humans? They are not in the center, and we are not taking care of the well-being on humans. And last but not least, there is a connectivity gap that is not allowing all the end users to have the services in each and every place. And of course, the cost to provide a uniform coverage in both wired and wireline is quite high. For the energy consumption, I already mentioned something. And last but not least, something that we are obliged to mention. We are having an old-fashioned regulatory framework. The governments, whenever a new generation is coming, they are coming and say, new spectrum, I need to sell it in high prices, ignoring that this spectrum, in order to be available and the service to be available to the mass market, to all the humans in a territory, should have, let's say, a proper network. So the money are going to the spectrum acquisition and not to the real services. So these are all problems that we need to have in mind when we are solving and when we are thinking about 6G and how we are evolving this. And if I can have the next slide, in order to have, let's say, the human in the center, we decided to bring, let's say, again, the UN 2030 Sustainability Development Goals into focus and try to help with the technological aspects to support these goals. For instance, helping the humans in the nutrition and food systems in order to improve, let's say, the water supplies and bring the connectivity everywhere with smart networks driven by the humans. For us, this is the stage that we need to start the research. The research in order to position 6G in a different way and change the way that we are operating, building, and offering networks to our end customers, and put again the human in the center. And having said that, I would like to have the last slide, and thank you so much for the time that you offered me.
Thank you very much, Kostas. That was a great way to summarize, really, I think, how we need to be thinking about 6G, particularly the point about ubiquity, security, data sovereignty, and carbon neutrality. It's a great way, I think, as we think about what it needs to be going forward. It's a great framework. I know that we're coming up towards the end of the session. I also know that we have another session that is just starting in a few minutes. I don't want to keep people from that. So let me just, take one question here, and I think we've heard a lot about how we need to be thinking about use cases, how we need to engage the industry. But my question for you both, Colin and Kostas, would be, how do we think about regional versus global collaboration? Obviously, the discussion today was a lot around what we can be doing, what we are doing to ensure that 6G aligns with European principles and national agendas. But I think you also noted, Kostas, that we need to be thinking about global coordination and global standards. So how do we think about that? What is more important? Is it a function of what's important now versus the future? But how do we think about that global coordination versus European agendas? And either of you, I know Colin, obviously your organization is global, so maybe you kick it off.
Yes, thank you. I mean, obviously, it is a key question. I think the underlying point is we want one global 6G standard. So we do not want regional flavors, and that's clearly the danger. Let's put that on the table, because that's the danger we need to try and avoid. Now, there will be 6G research and development all around the world. That's a given. And I think what we should be trying to do is we should be trying to play to Europe's strengths. And that means we should have an open, collaborative environment, which I believe we have with smart networks and services. And the other regions of the world will then come, the key players will come to Europe to work together with us to try and work out what that pre-standardization consensus will be. So I don't think we need to worry about competition, because I think we offer something unique in that collaborative framework. But we clearly do need to work with the other regions. And clearly one of the things my association does is we work with peer entities in Japan, China, Brazil, USA. I've probably forgotten one, but we need that collaboration both at the association level, standardization level, and indeed the government level, to make sure that we keep that goal of one global standard. So let's have technology developed in Europe for the world. Thank you.
Kostas, I mean, maybe you can have the last word.
Yeah, to be honest, I think in order to provide global scale, you need global standards. Of course, the flavors around the globe will be different, and the use cases and the services required are different. In order to avoid fragmentation, you need, let's say, a standardized word, and this standardized word is coming either from 3GPP or from ITU or from IETF for the automation and so on. So there are organizations around the globe that are standardizing. How and in which way we need to proceed and avoid this fragmentation, it's up to us. And I think the major thing is that Europe should get again a leading role in 6G. And we need to empower this, because we lag behind. And if you see the market shares that we have for 5G, we are the follower in all over the world. So having said that, yes, there will be particularities, there will be regional use cases, but the standard should be global in order to support, to avoid the fragmentation. That's it from my side.
Great, no, thank you. And I think, in terms of, again, the last word, I think probably, what was most poignant, maybe most important, what you said is that how this proceeds, how the industry comes together and what 6G will look like is up to us. And I think there's a lot of discussions right now, but is it too early? Why are we discussing 6G now? But I think that point of it being up to us, up to the industry, up to all of the industry stakeholders is critical, because unless we start now, we're not going to take it to where we want it to be. So thank you very much. Thank you, Kostas. Thank you, Colin. Thank you, Harald. Thank you, Pearse. This was wonderful. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. There's some more great sessions throughout the day. If you have colleagues who couldn't make it here, please tell them, tune in for the replays. And thank you all once again.